not a small-town pastor with 50 people in folding chairs. A real, legitimate celebrity pastor. Your church has thousands of members across multiple campuses. You're on television. You've written best-selling books. You sit on advisory boards alongside some of the most powerful men in the American church. And then one day, you decide to do something that your entire world tells you is wrong. Something that your allies, your colleagues, your publishing partners, and your denomination all beg you not to do. They pressure you privately. They pressure you publicly. They send you emails, make phone calls, pull in favors. You do it anyway. And in doing so, you crack open one of the deepest fault lines in modern American Christianity, a divide between two visions of what the church should be, who should be allowed on stage, and whether friendship can ever override theology. This is the story of the elephant room that wasn't supposed to be controversial, the invitation that broke everything, and the question that still hasn't been answered. When you sit down at the table with someone you believe is teaching heresy, are you extending grace, or are you giving them your stamp of approval? To understand why any of this mattered, you need to understand who James MacDonald was at his peak. MacDonald founded Harvest Bible Chapel in the Chicago suburbs in 1988. By the mid-2000s, it had grown into one of the most prominent evangelical megachurches in America, eventually stretching across 8 campuses with an estimated 12,000 members. He had a nationally syndicated radio program called Walk in the Word, had authored multiple books, and held seats on the advisory boards of major Christian organizations, including the Gospel Coalition and Mark Driscoll's church planting network, Acts 29. He was wired into everything. In 2011, MacDonald teamed up with Mark Driscoll, the famously brash tattooed pastor of Mars Hill Church in Seattle, another of the era's celebrity preachers, to create a new kind of event. Something raw, something unscripted, something that, as MacDonald put it, would get gospel men having gospel conversations. They called it the Elephant Room. Concept was disarmingly simple. Take 7 influential pastors of large churches, put them in a stage setup styled like a boxing ring, point some cameras at them, and let them hash out real disagreements, face to face, on the record, no PR handlers, no prepared statements. The tagline was, a quiet critique of the era's Twitter and blog theology wars. Instead of sniping at each other online, let's actually talk. Elephant Room 1 debuted in March 2011. It had genuine heat. David Platt, author of Radical and one of the era's most respected young pastors, pointedly challenged the consumerist culture of megachurches, an uncomfortable topic for a room full of megachurch pastors. Matt Chandler was there, Stephen Furtick, Perry Noble. The conversations were tense in places, but manageable. Nobody was prepared for what came next. In late 2011, James MacDonald announced the lineup for Elephant Room 2, scheduled for January 2012. And one name on that list caused an immediate, massive, multi-front explosion. Bishop T.D. Jakes. For anyone outside American evangelical circles, T.D. Jakes is one of the most famous pastors in the world. Founder of the Potter's House in Dallas, a congregation with over 30,000 members, a best-selling author, a film producer, a cultural icon. The man is a force. But inside the conservative, reformed evangelical world, the world of the Gospel Coalition, the world MacDonald had been a part of, Jakes was not just controversial. To many, he was off limits, disqualified from the table, and for 2 very specific reasons. First, the Trinity. Jakes' ministry had its roots in oneness Pentecostalism, which teaches what theologians call modalism, the belief that God is not 3 distinct, co-eternal persons as classical Christian orthodoxy teaches, but one God who appears in different modes at different times. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit as costumes, not persons. This is a doctrine the church has considered heresy since the 3rd century. It is not a secondary issue. It cuts to the heart of who Jesus is and how salvation works. And for years, Jakes had never clearly renounced it. Second, the prosperity gospel. Jakes was also widely associated with word of faith theology, the teaching that God rewards faith with financial blessing, that poverty is a spiritual failure, that health and wealth are markers of divine approval. To Reformed theologians, this isn't just wrong theology, it's predatory theology that exploits vulnerable people. So when MacDonald put Jakes' name on the Elephant Room 2 invitation, under the banner of gospel men having gospel conversations, the response was immediate. Not him, not like this, not here. The backlash came from everywhere at once. Mark Dever, one of the most respected Reformed pastors in the country, senior pastor of Capitol Hill Baptist Church in Washington, D.C., had already been announced as a speaker for Elephant Room 2. When the Jakes invitation dropped, Dever quietly backed out. He didn't want to sit on a stage where Jakes would be implicitly presented as a theological peer. John MacArthur's ministry published a blistering response, calling the whole enterprise a display of swagger and bravado that treated sacred doctrine like entertainment. A hipster boxing match more interested in optics than truth. Voddie Baucham, one of the most prominent Reformed black theologians in America, who had already called Jakes an example of the worst the black church has to offer in theological terms, went public with his concerns. He had actually been invited to take Dever's vacant seat at Elephant Room 2. MacDonald called him personally and reportedly told him that Jakes had renounced oneness Pentecostalism and would make that clear on stage. Baucham declined. He said he wasn't convinced. Within the Gospel Coalition, pressure built rapidly. Leaked internal email from Harvest Bible Chapel's executive director confirmed that influential leaders within TGC were actively pressuring MacDonald to pull the plug on Jakes' appearance. The message was direct: disinvite him or face the consequences. MacDonald's response was equally direct. He publicly resigned from the Gospel Coalition's Leadership Council before the conference even happened, preemptively cutting the cord before they could cut it for him. In a statement, he said he had very different views on how to relate to the broader church. He acknowledged it had already cost him some relationships. He didn't care. The Elephant Room 2 went forward as planned. T.D. Jakes was on that stage. January 25th, 2012, the cameras rolled and the world watched. Driscoll and MacDonald questioned Jakes directly on the Trinity. And in what was by any measure a significant moment, Jakes stated publicly that he had moved away from the oneness position. He acknowledged the Trinity. He used Trinitarian language. His critics immediately said it wasn't enough. They pointed out that his answers were carefully worded, more a statement of movement than of clear repudiation. After years of teaching and writing associated with oneness theology, one carefully managed television moment wasn't going to settle the question. Then there was what didn't happen. The prosperity gospel, arguably the more practically dangerous of Jakes' two theological problems, the one that affected how millions of people lived and gained money, was never addressed, not once. The panel let it pass entirely. Justin Taylor of the Gospel Coalition wrote afterward that without direct questions on those issues, the conversation had not genuinely advanced beyond what Jakes had written publicly 12 years earlier. MacDonald, to his credit, was transparent about the cost. Standing before the conference audience near the end, he said plainly, "It has cost me some relationships." Was bringing Jakes to the table an act of grace and engagement? Or had he given a platform to someone whose theology was genuinely harming people, dressed up in the language of fraternal dialogue? That question didn't get answered in Chicago that January. It's still being argued today. Meanwhile, the collateral damage kept spreading. Voddie Baucham had been booked separately weeks earlier to speak at a men's conference hosted at Harvest Bible Chapel. After he declined the Elephant Room invitation and went public with his criticisms of the Jakes decision, that speaking engagement evaporated. His slot was canceled. He was, by his own account, essentially shown the door and driven back to the airport. The optics were terrible. Here was MacDonald, hosting an event in the name of open dialogue and Christian brotherhood, and simultaneously removing a speaker from his own conference because that speaker had questioned him publicly. The big tent principles of the Elephant Room apparently had a limit. They didn't extend to people who criticized the person running it. The race dimension of this controversy also became impossible to ignore. African American pastors and theologians, including Baucham, raised concerns about Jakes. Some of them were accused of betraying the black church, of being tools of white Reformed theology. It was a deeply cynical move that Baucham called out directly, and which observers across the theological spectrum called disturbing. The Elephant Room was supposed to be about removing the elephants from the room. Instead, it became a masterclass in creating new ones. The Elephant Room controversy was, as it turned out, not the end of the James MacDonald story. It was only the beginning of a longer, darker unraveling. In the years that followed, a blog called The Elephant's Debt, named deliberately after the conference, began documenting a growing list of concerns about Harvest Bible Chapel. Financial mismanagement. Culture described by former elders as one of fear and intimidation. In 2013, MacDonald and church leadership ousted 3 elders who had raised accountability concerns, calling them satanic to the core, before later apologizing. The debt at Harvest reportedly climbed to tens of millions of dollars. Independent reporting uncovered that MacDonald had been drawing a salary of $350,000 a year in 2009, while the church buried itself financially. In 2019, things finally broke open. A journalist named Julie Roys had been investigating MacDonald and Harvest for months. MacDonald and the church sued her, sued the Elephant's debt bloggers, and sued their wives, an intimidation move that ultimately collapsed in court. And then came the tape. A hot microphone captured MacDonald making comments so inappropriate, including reportedly suggesting that child pornography be planted on the computer of Harold Smith, the CEO of Christianity Today, who had been covering the story that the elders of Harvest Bible Chapel terminated him immediately, not after a process, not after an investigation, that week. Done. The church's own subsequent investigation found that MacDonald had displayed a pattern of behavior they described as insulting and belittling, and declared him biblically disqualified from ministry. His co-creator, Mark Driscoll, had already resigned from Mars Hill in 2014 amid similar allegations of arrogance and abuse of power. Two of the most prominent celebrity pastors of their generation, the men who staged the Elephant Room, were both gone. So what do we make of all of this? The Elephant Room controversy cuts deep because it exposed something real, a genuine tension at the heart of modern American Christianity that has never been resolved. On one side, the argument that doctrinal precision is not optional, that the church's job is to protect its people from false teaching, and that sharing a stage with a heretic is a statement whether you intend it to be or not. On the other side, the argument that Christianity has become a world of tribal gatekeepers, that the impulse to draw lines is as often about power and competition as it is about truth, and that the only way to move anyone toward orthodoxy is to actually engage them. Both of those arguments have merit. Both of the MacDonald story ultimately revealed is that the celebrity pastor model, the multi-campus megachurch, the brand, the conference circuit, the Twitter theology, carries within it a structural weakness. One man becomes the institution when accountability is optional and criticism is treated as betrayal. Something eventually breaks. Always, the Elephant Room asked the right question. Are we willing to have the hard conversations? The tragedy is that its creator turned out to be the one most unwilling to have them when they were about himself. You made it to the end? What do you think? Was MacDonald right to invite Jakes and stand firm? Or did the critics have a point? I want to know your thoughts in the comments. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.